So, you're a Cleveland Browns fan. Just how big of a fan are you? Do you deserve a seat at the Dawgs Table? Well, you're here, aren't you?
The best fans, the most patient fans in the league.
This is the Dawgs Table.
Touchdown, Shabalaba Hub!
If you're obnoxious, opinionated, over the top, and you live for the Browns...
45-40, run, William, run! 20, 15, 10, 5, touchdown!
Welcome to your new family, the Dawgs Table, an official Dawgs By Nature podcast on the SB Nation and Vox Media Podcast Network. Let's do this. Welcome to the Dawgs Table. Now your hosts, Craig Fountain and Ryan Angelo.
Let's go! Let's go!
What's up, everybody? This is Craig Fountain and Ryan Angelo with the Dawgs Table. We are live streaming to you as part of the Dawgs By Nature Podcast Network, brought to you by...
So, you're a
that is a
Cleveland...
technical difficulty. That was apparently set to loop. Oh, well. But yeah, we are a Cleveland Browns roundtable discussion show. We go live every Tuesday at 9 p.m. on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And you can catch the show in audio format on the Dawgs By Nature Podcast Network, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. Ryan, how are you doing this week? Rough weekend.
Rough weekend. It is not a Victory Tuesday, unfortunately. But I'm here, buddy. What's up, Randy? How are you?
We have a special guest today, and we have producer from SB Nation and Vox Media covering the Cleveland Browns for Dawgs By Nature, Jared Mueller. How are you doing, Jared?
Gentlemen, I am old and I am some combination of pissy and frustrated, and been doing this a long time. So, you know, it's frustrating to have expectations and them to just be blown out of the water.
Yeah, it's certainly frustrating because we've had so much hope over the past few years, and it just every time it's just a letdown. But we we go into Miami, and man, was it a letdown. It was not just a loss, it was an ugly loss. And we go down there, it's hot. They got the Brown sideline in the sun, over 100 degrees. They get on the field, and we see our defense just perform. I mean, the expectations were low, right, Jared? Like, we're not expecting them to go out and do crazy things on defense, but this was just bad on another level. Would you agree?
Yeah, it absolutely looked like a team that knew they were going to lose. They just didn't know which way they were going to lose. And again, like with Atlanta and like with San Diego and even with Baltimore, which had a lot of backups, they were going against a team that couldn't run the ball very well, and they let them run the ball very well. Like, you're expecting Tyreek Hill to light teams up, and you're expecting Jalen Waddle and Mike Gesicki. Like, you're expecting all of that. And then all of a sudden, okay, we're just going to have, Mostert and Wilson and whoever else wants to run the football to be really good at it. It's almost as if they still haven't learned the lesson that teams will look at what you're terrible at and go after that. And they're like, oh, Miami's not good at running the ball, so they're not going to run the ball on us because they've got Hill and Waddle. Well, they're just going to run the ball on you and throw it to Hill and Waddle.
Yeah, it's a great point you bring up. And this Miami Dolphins team is one that ran it 37% of the time throughout the season, is where the run versus pass ratio landed coming into this game. And they threw the ball 33 times and put it on the ground 33 times. So they definitely went in there with the intention to run the ball, and they did it well. And we just could not stop it no matter what we did. They put up 195 yards rushing on us on 33 attempts. That's 5.9 yards per carry. It was ugly. What do you think, Jared? Like, what's this collapse? Is the team quitting? Is it coaching? Is it personnel?
Yeah, I would be paid a lot of money if I knew the answer. But I think it is. I don't think the team's quitting. I'll just be honest. I think they knew they couldn't win that game pretty much after the Nick Chubb fumble. And I know no one wants to hear that, right? But they're human beings looking at the other team, looking at their scheme, all of that. Like, if they didn't stay in kind of their cover 2 shell and their too high safety look, then they would have just audibled into and just destroyed the Browns with Hill and Waddle. And so I think they had an idea that they were not going to win that game. They were getting out physicaled. They threw a lot of bear fronts and 8-man fronts at the Browns offense, making it really, really difficult for Nick Chubb. Now, listen, does he succeed against 8-man fronts? I mean, he's faced the third most or second most in the league this year and still is, near the top. But in the end, they out-physicaled him. Kevin Stefanski did exactly what, at least early, exactly what Miami did to Cleveland. Miami can't stop the pass. They have one good cornerback and a bunch of street guys, so he threw the ball a lot. Unfortunately, Jacoby Brissett's going to make mistakes when you throw the ball a lot and when you get behind and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's a combination of all of those little things. I think when you think about building an organization, you can't have flaws at every little level. And they do. They just absolutely have flaws with some of the coaching, with some of the players. And so you put that all together and you get a game like this against probably the best team they've played so far this year.
Yeah, Ryan, any thoughts on defense before I bring up some offensive information?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you used the word performance because I didn't necessarily feel like that was a performance in any way, shape, or form. But it's just I can't sum it up any better than what Jared did. I mean, it looked like a team that was disinterested in being in the game. The defense, there was some lack of effort issues. There were some technique issues. I mean, guys out of place. It's the same story, different week, honestly, so just a lot of nasty things on tape that are floating around out there in the cyberspace that really kind of just summed up this defensive season for this team so far.
Yeah, so there was some interesting things said after the game before I go on to some of the offensive stuff. I'm going to read a quote to you, and this was by Myles Garrett, and I want to know, Jared, what you think of this quote. He said, "Doesn't matter if you're ready to run through a wall if it's in the wrong direction." What is he getting at here, Jared?
He tried to clarify that quote. I'm not sure that matters at this point in time. I think what Myles is getting at is that I think he's hinting at everything that we know that people complain about. Kevin Stefanski's not passionate enough. He's not yelling enough on the sideline. They're not motivated. Who are the leaders? All the stuff that, to be blunt, doesn't matter in the NFL until it matters, right? You don't hear about that. When Eli Manning is winning, wow, steady, doing this. He's just, what you're hearing from him. Before he started winning, he has no passion. He doesn't care. He's not motivating. It doesn't matter. You win, you look awesome. You lose, you don't. And so I think he's pointing to some of that. I think he's also pointing to there's not a lot of creativity in how he is used, which goes back to Greg Williams. I remember this conversation like it's yesterday. Greg Williams only let him use 1 or 2 pass rush moves. Like, that's all he was allowed to use. Like, you just said, hey, Myles Garrett, you can only do that. Well, in a lot of ways, that's what Joe Woods has done with him. He's barely moved from, his normal defensive end position. He's not inside very much, which you think about it. When you have Alex Wright, Jadeveon Clowney, and Myles Garrett, you got some big defensive ends. Let's run those guys inside. Let's do some of that. And so it just seems like I would say he is pushing back on the idea that they need a passionate leader or someone to rah the troops, but you do need people to send people in the right direction, far more important. And it doesn't sound like he believes that is happening wherever. We can point the direction at Joe Woods, but you can also remember, this is a little blip, but remember that Chris Kiffin left the Browns for about 2 weeks. I forget how long that lasted, to join, I think, his brother, if I remember right, and then came back, right? And so you have to ask the question, like, what's the investment level there, both from the coach and the players? Like, dude, you left. Like, it wasn't not announced by the Browns, but everyone knew you left. You cleaned your crap out. Oh, you're back? Like, so there is some of that. Like, it's a little thing, but I think it's a little bit telling as well.
You know, the more we talk about it, the more it keeps coming to mind on the defensive side of the ball. We had Delpit not get the start. They sat him for one play. There was a I should have pulled the audio. An exchange between Stefanski and Tony Grossi. Grossi tried to corner him on what happened or what the intentions were, but it seems as though there might be a disciplinary issue with Grant Delpit that caused him not to get the start. We also saw Perion Winfrey not get to dress, which is also expected to be because of a disciplinary issue. Perion Winfrey to me is worth bringing up because I think that when you look at this front office, one of the failures this year is really making sure that not that we have all pros at defensive tackle or in the front seven, but we needed serviceable guys to bridge us into the next part of the roster building, right? Like our roster, we're not in a rebuild mode, but the way they retool this roster around Deshaun Watson and all that money and stuff is going to start changing things. Winfrey was supposed to be kind of like a bridge or a stopgap right there. It's not working out, and it's disappointing to see it be because of disciplinary reasons, seemingly.
That's the second game of the year for him too, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Myles Garrett talked about it. Like, we tried to talk to the dude, and Stefanski's basically disciplining him by not playing him. And I support what the coach is doing. That was earlier this year. The Delpit thing is the dumbest thing. Not the dumbest. I've heard a lot of dumb things in the decade plus I've covered this team, but what in the world do you think one play is going to do? Right.
Really taught him.
Yeah. And if you want to teach him because you want him to get the message, because you want him to be humiliated or whatever publicly, and you don't tell people what he did, then they're just like, you're the moron, and Grant Delpit must be smart. And then you have Perion Winfrey tweeting after the game, God don't like ugly, or I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty much what he said, in a tweet, and it'll all come to light or whatever. I think in the end, Perion Winfrey, they kind of had to draft him at that point in time in the 4th round, right? Everybody thought he'd be a 2nd round pick. But there's a reason he fell to the 4th round, and you're seeing it. Discipline, not just discipline from off the field suspension, but being late, focused on details, having a plan for what you're doing. Like, he doesn't have much of any of that. And so, we all got excited about that press conference. I didn't. Like, from a mental health guy over here was going, what in the world is that guy on? What's wrong there? Like, there's just a little too much going on, right? There's something to be excited for about 30 seconds and then have the rest of your interview. That guy was pacing, sweating, barking for 7 straight minutes. Like, looking back, they're like, that might not have been normal. Like, there might be something a little off there. I don't know. So, overall, Craig, I think you brought up a great point about team building. It's such a weird place for the Browns in that they aren't going to have Watson. They knew they wouldn't have him for a decent chunk of this year. So the kind of the win now move was Jadeveon Clowney, right? Bringing him back for whatever it is, $10 million. Everything else was long-term. The Browns, when you think of like stopgap measures, they don't believe in them. They believe in young players who are cheap or great players that they paid a bunch of money to. They don't believe in anything in between, or at least they haven't shown that they believe in anything in between. They're not drafting a 24-year-old who can start pretty quickly. Even if he could start pretty quickly, they don't care. They're drafting the 21-year-old who has a higher upside and can hopefully develop over 3-4 years versus the 24-year-old who's already ready, might not have a high upside, but can play a little bit, can be an okay starter. Not really the kind of guy they're looking at. And whether they change their MO is a really important question going into next year, because we can't have a bunch more 21-year-olds or Taven Bryan, 1 year because he used to be a 1st-round pick and he's athletic. You need people who know how to play the game one way or the other.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. I mean, some of these guys are meant to be developed and they have higher upside, and maybe they reach this upside at age 23 or 24 when some of these guys are coming out of college at that age. But what's interesting to me is they're so fixated or confident in themselves when it comes to dealing with the salary cap. Like, what are you going to do when you develop all these 21-year-olds into 24-year-old all pros or second team all pros? Are you going to pay them all?
Right.
You know, there's got to be some sort of middle ground there. But you know, all right. So offensively, we saw Jacoby Brissett regress to the mean a little bit. He was 22 of 35 for 212 yards and a touchdown. His QBR was 57.4, passer rating 89.2. This was not Jacoby Brissett's best game. Ryan, I'm going to take a victory lap. Brissett cannot play from behind, even against a bad defense. You let him get out too far ahead of you, and there's just no hope. There's no hope at all. We even, you know, gave him the opportunity. We handed the ball to Nick Chubb only 11 times. He got 5.7 yards per carry and a touchdown, 63 yards total. That was thanks in part to a 33-yard run. Donovan Peoples-Jones led the team in targets and receptions. He had 9 targets, 5 receptions, 99 yards. That was almost 20 yards per reception. The longest was a 38-yard grab. We saw Donovan Peoples-Jones do some nice things. Amari Cooper was only targeted 3 times, but he hauled in all 3. They targeted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 receivers in total, which seems to be a little bit. Yeah, am I crazy? That's not the way
A little
it's gone
excessive
so far this year, right?
No, yeah, I mean, so Cooper was shadowed by Howard. It's something Denzel Ward gets frustrated by sometimes, is that he doesn't get to shadow anybody. Howard was on Cooper, so a lot of better options than throwing towards Xavier Howard, right? So 3, I'm actually surprised it was 3, given how it felt like as his fantasy football owner and watching the game. I was surprised it's even 3.
Yeah, and you know, Kareem Hunt had 6 carries, 9 yards. That was not a good day for Kareem Hunt. Is he throwing in the towel? It kind of looks like he's throwing in the towel. I don't know. So
it's hard to say.
Yeah,
I would argue that this was not a very good performance by the offensive line either.
No,
it's kind of hard
rough.
to throw the ball and run the ball when you've got about 2 seconds to make a decision in the backfield. This was not their finest performance. So, you know, I kind of give Jacoby a little slack because, you know, yeah, you're playing from behind, but at the same time, you know, you're getting rushed from every angle and most of your guys are turnstiles. They're just letting dudes go by. I mean, that's hard to be successful in any, you know, in any situation. So you got to kind of give him a little bit of slack. That's what he was dealing with. And it was pretty evident throughout the entire game.
It felt like we were looking at the Greg Williams, Chris Hubbard, left tackle, right tackle. Yeah. I don't think Jed Wills was as terrible as Jack Conklin. Jack Conklin being terrible, I mean, he was bad, like
terrible,
ridiculously bad. Like, what the crap? Like, you can't, like, it's hard to have one weak link on an offensive line, but when you have Froholt in, you know, I don't think Posick has done as well recently. Like, he's kind of regressing a little bit. But yeah, Conklin looking terrible this many weeks away from being injured is really concerning. The one thing I will say about Brissett, I'm not sure I've seen a quarterback in a long time in Cleveland make the throw that he made to Donovan Peoples-Jones, where he threaded the needle. There was a safety behind. I think it was a linebacker and a cornerback, and he threaded that needle. Like, I don't think I've seen that throw from a Cleveland Browns quarterback or many other quarterbacks in a long, long time. So, I mean, again, you got to do more than one, but man, that was like, you watch that throw, you're like, that's Brissett.
Yeah,
like,
it was nice.
He made that throw.
That's part of what's a little bit frustrating with Jacoby Brissett is you're like, how can we get him to do this consistently? Because it's like it's there, you know, like a word on the tip of your tongue, but you can't consistently roll it out.
And that's fitting, right? New England picked him in the second round. Indianapolis traded, I think, a second round pick to get him, gave him a 3-year, $33 million contract, whatever it was that they gave him. You know, all of that kind of stuff. He's been that tease, but the Browns are the only team that ever really got value so far for him. 1 year, $5 million. Like, they're getting pretty darn good production for $5 million. I mean, I think they're getting great production at a quarterback position. Again, it's not good enough, but if you had a better defense or you make a kick here or don't, fumble an onside kick, the Cleveland Browns are 5-3. Like, that's crazy to think, given all the negativity all three of us have. Make a kick against the Chargers, get the onside kick against the Jets, and we're talking about 5-3, and we're not all pissed off. We're a little pissed off.
Right.
So the Miami Dolphins beat the Browns 39-17. They come out of this 7-3. They are ahead of the Buffalo Bills in the AFC East. So are the Jets. I did not see this coming. The Browns are going into Buffalo this weekend. The Bills are 6-3, 2-game losing streak currently. So things are not going well for Buffalo. I will say, did you guys watch the Vikings-Bills game? Because that was one of the best games I've seen in a long, long time.
It was pretty entertaining.
Yeah, it was fun. You look at that, and it's kind of like the Buffalo-Kansas City game from last year. 2 of them? Whatever it was. Like, right. I feel like it's really fun to watch good teams play.
It's also heartbreaking.
Let's get into a little bit of a preview. This is so the weather could be a factor in this game. They're forecasting around 2.5, maybe 3 feet of snow in Buffalo for this weekend. This could be reminiscent of the we were talking before the show, the Jamal Lewis, Derek Anderson days, that 8-0 victory in the snow. Jared, what'd you call it? The snowman game?
Yeah,
is that what it's been coined?
Game, yeah.
So, yeah, it could be an interesting game weather-wise. It could really dictate how these teams play. Now, Josh Allen is ailing a little bit, right? He's nursing an elbow injury, but things have really been looking up for Buffalo in a couple of areas, especially compared to the way last season went. And if we're scouting them a little bit, their run game has kind of been stronger this year than I would have anticipated. They had Devin Singletary and Zach Moss kind of as a 1-2 punch over the past few years, and it hasn't been successful at all. Both backs were underachieving. Zach Moss is no longer with the Buffalo Bills, but Devin Singletary has really grown this year as a player, and he's been producing on the ground. So their running attack has gotten better. Couple that with, the Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs, Gabriel Davis, Isaiah McKenzie connections, not to mention Dawson Knox. This offense is very, very, very good. Now, the weather could take the passing game to some extent out of the forefront of their strategy. And I think that is where that might be both terrifying and a good thing for us at the same time, because look at what Miami just did to us. Jared, do the Browns have even a little bit of a chance to win this game? Buffalo's, it's going to be in Buffalo. There's likely going to be weather. They're on a 2-game losing streak. Do we have a chance to win this game? And if we do, how do we get there?
I think it's one of those things, and I think somebody said it in one of the comments that popped up, but I think it's just one of those games that if they win, it's going to be a, holy cow, the Browns won. Like, almost, it won't make sense, because you're exactly right. Yes, you want to limit Josh Allen, but do you want to invite the run? No. Like, now you put your 295-pound defensive tackles that are 6'5", you put them on skates and let them get slid out of every hole and every gap possible. And you watch Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, if he comes back, fly that way, not be able to stop on a dime and turn around and come the other way. You watch John Johnson go, I thought that guy was going to be over there. I'm going to watch the rest of this play go, right? Yes, in general, you want Josh Allen out of the equation. And then you don't want anybody running the ball on the Cleveland Browns. So, I think if they win, it's going to feel very Brownsy, because I don't think it's going to be miraculous. I think it's just going to be like, they won that game, huh? Or Josh Allen, the cold and the snow, the elbow, something happens, right? He's just sore. It's tight. I wouldn't bet anyone's money on it. Even my slightly worst enemy, I'm not betting their money that the Browns are gonna win, right? Like that's just not gonna happen. But the problem is all of us believe the Cleveland Browns have a lot of freaking talent. So it's hard to look at Myles Garrett, Denzel Ward, John Johnson III, Grant Delpit, Greg Newsome, Jadeveon Clowney, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, Deion Jones, and go, oh yeah, they're gonna get crushed. Like it's so hard to do that because all of those players, you're like, oh, those are some really good players. How are you so terrible? And it's just hard to get over the fact that they are just been so terrible. So
it's like we're cooking.
Knows the answer.
It's like we're cooking with the right ingredients, but like we're not going about it in the right order. So the cake doesn't come out right.
We're not cooking. We're washing dishes with ingredients. Is what we're trying to do. Like it doesn't work.
What's interesting about Buffalo though is it hasn't necessarily translated into wins. They are third in the AFC East behind the Jets and the Dolphins, but they have the number 2 scoring offense in the NFL. And when it comes to their defense and the points they allow, they're second best in the NFL. This is a top offense and a top defense. Now, we saw Miami come in and we said, hey, we gotta watch Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. They're only running the ball 37% of the time. Buffalo's in that same kind of scenario. That's the same 37.76% for Buffalo, kind of the same strategy. But it doesn't, that's how they're going to attack. Between the weather, it's just, man, it's scary. It's really scary.
I feel like Ryan, you look really optimistic. Like I get this sense of like hope and
he's just scared to say it.
Gonna do like I just feel it. Like you're over there like these guys are idiots.
No, I am trying my best to be positive today. I told Craig before the show started that this might be a negative one from me, but just because I'm just feeling the weight of this season right now, and it's tough because they're as rational of a Browns fan as I am. There is that just bit of hope and expectation that just happens to creep in there for you. And, I just can't quite understand what's going on with the defense. And, I joked after this last loss that I'm not going to pick them to win a game for the rest of the season until I see them string 2 to 3 games together where they actually look like a defense, because it's just so hard to pick them to do anything successful right now because they're so disjointed on defense.
Yeah. And it doesn't make any sense. The one thing about coaching that I always say though is I promise you Joe Woods is not teaching them to do most of the things I see on the field, right? Like there's not a chance like that. You don't teach 3 people in the same gap. Like, so that's one of the hard things. You're like, there's no way that scheme that's planned, but they ain't getting the picture. That's for sure.
Right. So ultimately that falls back on the coach though, right?
It does. But then how much, like, again, this goes back to money. Somebody actually asked a question on Twitter or talked about on Twitter. It goes back to money where you're like, well, I get paid a lot of money and you don't. I'm going to do my thing. Right. When you don't have that buy-in, and I think that's the part that really seems to be missing. It's just not bought into Joe Woods in a lot of ways.
Right.
So there's really not a whole lot, I think, to get into between this Browns Bills game, right? Like they have a top offense, a top defense. We're struggling on both sides of the ball. Jared, you've been covering this team for a while. I'm interested to get your opinion on a couple things before we close out this portion of the show. So, power dynamics in Cleveland. He's if you're listening, he's laughing. I'm gonna get back on this whole Joe Woods, Kevin Stefanski type deal. Woods still has a job. I'm inclined to believe that if he still has a job, he's going to keep it for the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Who is deciding when and if Joe Woods keeps his job? Is it Kevin Stefanski? Is it Paul DePodesta? Is it Andrew Berry? Is it the 3 of them?
Yeah. So what's
the
interesting is
power dynamic in Cleveland? It seems very convoluted and not traditional by any means.
well, and it's never been traditional. One of the things to remember for all of his faults, that'd be a great idea. If they're looking at it, that'd be great. So for all his faults, Jimmy Haslam illegally ran a really good pilot Flying J. And one of his beliefs from a business perspective is you keep people kind of in leadership positions that don't like each other or that disagree. And by doing that, you will it'll get creative and it'll kind of grind together. And it's what he's done in Cleveland since he owned the team. It was the GM thought differently than the head coach. And they were going to, by doing that, you will somehow get the amalgamation of those two kind of ideals, and they would
the compromise.
The compromise, or put two things together and get a better thing, kind of thing. And then this GM and head coach, the key word was alignment. So Haslam listened to Paul DePodesta about alignment. And so it is all three. It is really all three that are together making that decision. You have to remember that all week long, it may not be Depot, but Barry, Stefanski, Woods, and Alex Van Pelt are creating the game plan, are looking at data, are looking at understanding all of this. So everything is lined up. So Andrew Barry, for whatever he knows from a football perspective, coaching perspective, knows the game plan that week and is involved in not game planning, but understanding it. And so the other thing to remember is Kevin Stefanski was hired first. He joined the search committee to hire Andrew Barry. And so when you think about the power dynamic, it's really hard to know right now, who does Jimmy Haslam trust? And what they've tried to do is that no one is saying anything different to Haslam. Depot, Barry, Stefanski, they're all saying the same exact thing. The problem with that is that means they're all on the hook for Woods. And so in a lot of ways, there's kind of an all or nothing kind of concept, at least with Barry and Stefanski. Depot could stick around for whatever reason for a long time. But with Barry and Stefanski, it is really kind of we're in this together kind of thing. If you start to hear any Barry disagrees with Stefanski or vice versa, that's when you start to know there's some cracks showing and there's some concern when it comes to their alignment. But right now, you could close your eyes, and unless you knew their voices, you wouldn't know which one was talking. You just wouldn't.
Do you buy the idea that Barry and Stefanski are aligned with DePodesta and the emphasis that the organization puts on analytics?
Yeah, very, very much so. Barry is the least of the three, but not by far, not far off. He got really influenced by Howie Roseman in Philadelphia in his 1 year. And so he wants to be a little bit more aggressive, but they've allowed him to be aggressive with Jack Conklin and Austin Hooper and Case Keenum. And those didn't always work out, right? They allowed him to be aggressive in free agency, not so much, thinking more long-term with the draft, be aggressive in free agency. And we got to be honest, those free agent signings, Conklin worked out until the injury, and this year he's struggling, right? But beyond that, most of his free agent signings haven't really panned out. Amari Cooper is someone who we're just waiting for him to check out, to be honest. He's checked out of the Raiders. He checked out of the Cowboys. He checks out at some point in time with both teams so far. And so he really hasn't, his free agency kind of win now aggressive stuff really hasn't worked out, but neither has the young drafting kind of stuff. But yeah, in general, the three of them are pretty much lockstep with all of that.
Yeah, it just feels like some of that risk reward mentality mixed in with a little bit of that. We don't need somebody to get a home run. We just need them to get on base, Moneyball type thing. Last year, it almost seemed like it was starting to work a little bit with the defensive line, and then the one got roofied or took bath salts or whatever, and he's not around. But, there was a little bit of success there with that approach. But it's been other than that, I think we can call it a failure, right? Like a failed effort when it comes to that. Do you believe in Barry as an evaluator and a drafter? Jared's like, you didn't tell me you were going to ask me this stuff.
I don't normally ask for rundowns, right? Whatever. I'll talk sports.
No.
So that's a hard question. Yeah. I do. I think my biggest concern with the Browns is they had 1 foot in the future and 1 foot in the present, and you just can't do that in professional sports. Like, they needed to come out and say, we know this is going to be kind of a rough year as we kind of get ready. But instead they signed, and again, I use the Clowney signing because it's pretty much the big one. Cooper, you just had to make that deal. I don't think that was a win now kind of deal. Like 5th round,
no brainer, crime of opportunity at a minimum.
Right.
Yeah, like you take that deal. But if they would have made that deal for like a 3rd round or a 2nd round pick, then you'd be like, that's a win now move. But in the end, you just got to make that move. The only move they made that was win now was Clowney. Maybe David Bell, he's a 3rd round pick. Everything else, like they traded down out of the 2nd round, right? They made a lot of different moves that were Deshaun Watson is obviously a long-term move. They kind of trying to live in both worlds. And so they have young draft picks, but they signed John Johnson, right? Or they just felt like they were trying to do both. They got a little greedy, I guess would be the way. I think, to be blunt, if we unfortunately go back a little too far, I think going to the playoffs in 2020 is the biggest issue that impacted this team. I think they thought they would suck. They would be able to draft the quarterback in 2021, move on for Baker Mayfield, build the youth along with what they've already done, keeping some players. Instead, it's like, oh, we made the playoffs. Sign John Johnson, sign Jadeveon Clowney, sign Troy Hill, sign
Should we
Anthony
give
Walker.
Baker $35 million per year?
Right.
Should we give
very
Baker
different
35?
conversations?
Yeah, very different conversations. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, no, that doesn't work. We need to go all out for Deshaun Watson, which my buddies didn't believe me in October when I told them it was going to be Baker or Watson. And they were like, they're not going to go after Watson. He's not coming here. It's like, it's Baker or Watson. It's easy. I should have put some money on that. So I think the problem is when it comes to Barry, he was trying to feed 2 masters, and I hate to use too much spiritual language there, but he was trying to feed 2 masters. And when you try to do that, you fail both, and you can't do that in professional sports.
Yep.
All right. So tough questions. We're going to have an interesting offseason. We have a ton of players set to hit free agency. We don't have 1st round picks to work with. We're going to be questioning our front office. We're going to be questioning the coaching staff unless something this season takes a big change in direction.
And I want to tell you this. So I was a huge Deshaun Watson fan coming out of college. And what I saw from Watson I think it was early in his last year, he put the pressure on himself and he sucked. Like he was throwing interceptions. He was trying to do too much. Maybe it was his 2nd to last year. I'm really, from a narrative perspective, it might get really ugly if Deshaun Watson tries to save the season as soon as he returns, right? We saw what it was like in the preseason game against Jacksonville. That didn't look like a quarterback. And I do think that guy really does forget all the off-field stuff it is what it is. No one needs to rehash it. If you don't know, you know, or you weren't paying attention. But that guy cares on the field. And my biggest concern is he's going to grip that football really, really hard and try really, really hard to make every pass perfect, win 2 games every quarter kind of thing. So think of that narrative you were just kind of playing out, Craig. Add to it a little excitement and a lot of struggle from this guy you spent 3 1st round picks, all the other crap they gave up, and whatever guaranteed money, $243 million. So add to that narrative that I believe is probably going to come from watching every single snap of Deshaun Watson in college.
That's pressure in and of itself. I mean, assuming he gives a shit, and I think he does, that he's got one of the most lucrative contracts in NFL history that other players can't even talk their ownerships and front offices into even getting them in the ballpark of, this was more than just about a paycheck to him. And now he's got to go out there and prove that he's worth this money. So either he could be hard on himself, B, he's too cool for school, and he'll, everything will be fine and dandy, or he'll be Kenny Galladay and just say, I got my money. And,
it's just unfortunate because sorry, go ahead. You're good. I was just saying, it's unfortunate for us as Browns fans because we're just we should have known that the moment that rational Browns fans should have known that when his suspension was increased to 11 games, when we knew it wasn't going to be, 4 or 6, this season was going to be whatever it was, right? We weren't playing for this season most likely anymore. We're playing for next year and maybe even the year after, because we're not really going to truly see what we have in this until next year or possibly the year after, because we may go into next season and the defense may get gutted. There may be guys on this team that may not be on the team next year. So it could look drastically different next year. And then we might be sitting here next year going, we're going to have to wait until next year because, we had to get rid of a lot of baggage this offseason and we're going to start over now. So, the guy is 26 years old, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Watson.
Yeah.
So, he's still super young for a quarterback. And, you guys, like Jared said, we've invested in the future. So it's the future now. We're not playing for the last few games of the season, and depending on how the offseason goes, it may not even be next season. So, it's tough.
And it's also tough because
it's probably a good thing there's not a power struggle in the front office, at least that we know of, because this would be an ideal opportunity if there was a power struggle for a guy like Andrew Berry to be like, Watson's my first round pick, essentially. Get me a new coach, get me a new offensive coordinator, get me a new defensive coordinator. We are building around our new quote unquote first round pick, Deshaun Watson. Right. The other line of thinking is Stefanski's going to make it until he can show if he can do something with Watson or not. And, there seems to be all these different scenarios that could reset or extend the clock on this coaching staff, which is fascinating to me because there's plenty of good arguments. Now, for one, I'll go on the record saying I think Kevin Stefanski is and will be a great head coach. He may be going through some growing pains. This may not be an ideal situation for him. The fact that he's gotten this production out of Brissett, and I know he's not an offensive coordinator. I know. But the fact that he's gotten this production out of Brissett in this offense, considering the circumstances, is impressive to me. It almost, to me, I'd give the guy an award, give him an extension, whatever, but the buck does stop with him. Something needs to happen with the defense. So anyways, I just wanted to get that out there. Sorry, Jared. I know you had something to say.
No, and I think the other thing, two things. One, obviously the way they lost early games make it frustrating because they were in it. So there's they're so close. There's expectations. But then also the schedule. We all said, this schedule is easy in the beginning. They've only lost to one team with a losing record, and that's the Falcons at 4-6, right? The Chargers are 5-4. The Jets are good, or at least have a good record. Miami has a good record. New England has, I believe, is 5-4 as well. And so they've lost those close games. But again, every other team besides the Falcons they've lost to has a winning record. That says something at least. I will say, I believe from what I understand that the acquisition of Deshaun Watson pretty much guaranteed Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry through the 2023 season at a minimum, possibly more. And I wouldn't be shocked if there is a good push at the end of the season, if you see an extension for both of those guys, if you get 4, 5, 6 wins, in the last few games or last, whatever we got left games, would not shock me if those two guys got an extension sometime in the off season. Even if it's a 1 or 2 year, just as we're going in the right direction, folks. We're good. Right. Now, it might go along with Joe Woods getting fired and Mike Prefer getting fired. Somehow special teams might be as close to as bad as defense. None of us just know enough about special teams to say more about it. We're just like, you're missing kicks and you're taking things out of the end zone. You shouldn't stop doing that. But the extensions for these two could coincide with the firings of the other two.
Yeah, it's fair to say that you can't judge Kevin Stefanski until he has a full season with Deshaun. He's been handcuffed with Baker and Jacoby. So, he's going to finally have a real quarterback. He's an offensive-minded head coach. that'll be the determining factor, most likely, that's going to make his tenure either short or long in Cleveland.
All right, so I have more that I want to get on this subject, but we are going to save that for the overtime show. This is it for today's episode on Dawgs By Nature. We are the Dawgs Table, a Dawgs By Nature podcast on the SB Nation and Fox Media Network. We go live every Tuesday at 9 on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You can find us there. Catch the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. After the fact on the Dawgs By Nature podcast network. Just search Dawgs By Nature wherever you're listening. It's there, I promise. This is Craig Fountain and Ryan Angelo with special guest Jared Mueller. And until next time, go Browns.
Go Browns.
Go to sleep.
All right. So that is it for the audio replay. We are still live with you guys. I posted the link in the comments. This is the Garage Beers portion of the show. We get to kind of let our hair down and you know, we'll do the old school thing. We'll bring you guys in and we can talk some questions. Jared, how much time you got? I know that you I don't want to keep you too late past your bedtime. You're welcome as long as you'd like, but I don't want you to feel obligated.
It looks like I got about 10 minutes. My dog will start barking and she has a bedtime.
All right. Fair enough. I'm going to bring in Justin. Justin, thanks for joining the show.
What's going on, guys? How's
right.
it going?
Outstanding. As good as it can be and miserable at the same time. I don't know. Jared, I might need to take you up on some counseling services. Are you for hire?
That would be unethical and not going to happen.
All right. Fair enough. He's on the record. All right. So here's a question for you guys. The big question, and I see a lot of the fan base kind of calling for change at defensive coordinator, but a lot of this fan base is losing trust in Kevin Stefanski, saying he is not a leader of men. He is not a motivator. What do you guys think about this? Justin, I'll let you go first because you just joined the show. And then I'm interested to see Jared and Ryan, what you think about Kevin Stefanski, because a lot of folks are saying the offense is all fine and dandy. We get it. He's doing what he needs to do on offense, but maybe if he can't handle that and lead the guys on defense instead of delegating that to his defensive coordinator, maybe he should give up offensive play calling and then he would have time to do that. Justin, your thoughts as a Browns fan?
I'm not that big of a Stefanski fan. I liked where last season before that, when he went for it on like 4th and 1 or whatever, but yeah, the whole way digging up being a dead horse, but the whole way the Baker Mayfield thing went down with him just soured me on him.
You know, it's interesting. He is aggressive. You bring up the 4th downs. This past week, we were 2 for 5 on 4th downs. We went 5 times. We actually gave up, if I remember correctly, Jacoby Brissett was sacked 3 times. One of those sacks came on a big 4th down attempt that could have kept us in the game. You know, he shows some aggressiveness. You know, Jared, your thoughts on Kevin Stefanski as a leader of men, play calling, delegating, that sort of thing. Do we have the format correctly?
You know, I think Stefanski, you saw that the players believed in him when they were winning, right? Like they believed in him when they were winning, and they don't when they're not, a little bit, which is overly simplified, but that's just kind of that personality. You know, you're not always going to have a Jared who can motivate you through like 5 quick words and some hilarity, you know, like he is who he is. I think the delegating, bluntly, I don't think Kevin Stefanski had a lot of options when he was hired in the Browns, right? Think about the organization that he came into. Who's Andrew Berry? They've gone through so many other people, so many coaching staff, so many general managers, all of that. And then you have Kevin Stefanski who coached in one organization. He didn't coach anywhere else. He was in Minnesota. So he's in Minnesota. He only has all of those guys that are connected to Mike Zimmer, basically. So he doesn't have a lot of connections in the league where he spent 2 or 3 years here, 2 or 3 years here. So he had Joe Woods. And so he took Joe Woods, right? I'm not sure who else he could have hired that had a level of competency that he could be a defensive coordinator. Again, I don't know. And so I think that mistake has played out, because I think the unfortunate thing is Joe Woods and some of the research says cover 3 and zone is generally going to be your best bet, especially with Myles Garrett. Gives a little bit more time for him to get. But then you have Denzel Ward, Greedy Williams, Martin Emerson, who are physical, want to be up close. Greg Newsome, cornerbacks. Like there's been a misfit there. So that's a long statement to say, I don't know if you're going to get any better. And so maybe I'm just accepting mediocre, but mediocre for me is better than might be great and is going to be terrible. Freddie Kitchens, Greg Williams, Hugh Jackson, Rob Chadinsky, Mike Pettin. I know I'm missing some guys in there. Like, oh, young guy up and coming, might be amazing, might be the next Mike McDaniel, Sean McVay, right? I like a steady presence at this point in time because I've gotten excited too often. I just want somebody steady. I know what to expect from Kevin Stefanski, and I think that's what the players do appreciate about him. He's not all over the place.
Yeah, and that could work to his advantage. I mean, right now it's not, because everybody wants him all fired up and yelling and screaming and this and that and the other. I mean, we're at a point where people actually want Greg Williams back, which blows my mind. But you look at guys like Mike McDaniel, you brought up in Miami. He's been hilarious to watch in his press conferences and how he interacts and deals with people. But in a way that's kind of very Baker Mayfield-ish, and that's going to bite him in the ass when things aren't going so well. He's funny. He's charming. He's humorous. He's youthful. Wait till things don't go his way, and then they're going to turn on him. On the flip side, you have guys like, Zimmer, who are known to be hotheads, right? And then maybe they're too tough on players. Maybe Mangini shouldn't have guys running suicides or whatever because they're late to practice or something. There's Kevin Stefanski is very much in the middle of that spectrum. And I think you're absolutely right. Knowing what to expect, knowing what you're going to get out of them, I think is a good thing. Ryan, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of with Craig. I like Kevin. I think that he can be successful at this level as a head coach. I mean, obviously, listen, at any level of football, your coach is only as successful as the pieces that are around him, right? So that goes from coaching staff to players. And I know Justin had mentioned how he handled the Baker situation, but listen, he inherited Baker. Baker wasn't a quarterback that he drafted. He may not have liked Baker as a person. He may not have liked Baker as a player. So, I mean, I don't really care how he handled that situation. I mean, if you inherit a bad employee, then it's up to you to make that change in whatever way you see fit. And let's not forget, we just discussed this before we, went off the audio portion. He's not the only person that makes the decisions in that team. He's not the full, he's not the head honcho. I mean, I know he's the head coach, but he's not the only person in the front office that's making decisions. It's him, it's Barry, it's DePodesta. It's all those guys together. So, I don't think he can take all of the blame for everything so far. I think it's a collective effort. And I think that's somewhat of what the problem has been with the Browns for many years now, is it's too many Chiefs and not enough Indians, right? So he's only as successful as what he has around him. And I don't think Joe Woods is a successful piece for him. I think that'll probably change the end of the year. But I think once he gets everything the way that he wants, he can be successful.
You will always see facial reactions when I see a pet. I'm always like, ooh, cat. Oh, there's a cat. Hey, what's up? So that is absolutely only related to I saw a cat.
Oh, you're good.
I'm great with cats when I don't get near them because of my allergies. Like, oh, kitty, you're cute. Yeah, I think the last thing I do have to jump off, but the one thing I will say about the whole Baker Mayfield thing is I think if he had it his way, Odell Beckham Jr. would have stayed around. And I think the unfortunate reality is Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham Jr. actually agreed. Both of them wanted to run around and have a kind of a playground style offense. And there is nothing about Kevin Stefanski that is playground style anything, right? Like Baker Mayfield wanted Tom Brady to stay retired, and he wanted to go to Tampa Bay when Bruce Arians was there no risk it, no biscuit. Like that's what he wants to do. He wants to, it's all on me. I'm the point guard, which can be great. Listen, I'm not going to pretend like it can't be. I'm not going to pretend like Ben McAdoo is going to get the best out of him in Carolina or anyone. But that's what he wanted. That's what OBJ wanted. And Kevin Stefanski's over here going, yeah, I need you to take a 3-step drop that takes you 1.75 seconds. I need you to look directly here. If that's not open, I need you to look directly here and then throw the ball here. And Baker's like, that's not, I don't want to paint inside the lines, right? So you just, again, it's a mismatch. It's not about good or bad. It's just absolutely a mismatch. And Stefanski wasn't going to change. Baker wasn't going to change. And so you get what you got, unfortunately. So it is unfortunate. Again, I said on the audio version or the audio portion, I think them making the playoffs in 2020 push this team in the direction that just made this all really difficult. Unfortunately, it was fun, but it really set the team up poorly. So, guys, I got to run. Justin, you got a great voice for this, man. Just FYI.
Thank you.
It's pretty good. Like it all set up.
Hold on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello. I'm the manliest man on this podcast here. I'm just saying, like, dude, like you got the right mic and you got the right voice for it. So I hope you're using that to some kind of advantage for yourself.
I am. I actually do have a YouTube channel.
Makes sense to me now. All right, guys, you guys take
Phenomenal.
Take care, Jared.
Thanks,
Good night.
All right.
I was thinking,
Yeah, Justin
Herm
comes in and makes me
Edwards.
feel less of myself.
it's the hair.
Jesus.
Now I was thinking, Herm Edwards, he just got kicked out of what was it, Arizona State? He would be a good pickup as like a consultant or something. Because he's definitely that leader that Stefanski's not.
Yeah, but then again, is that just another chief? You know what I mean? Like,
I mean, yes and no, but look, if you want a fiery guy on defense, there's some guys that can get by with that fire and that attitude. We've had some that have had potential to run really good defenses. I actually think, and I will get murdered for this, I'm sure. Whoever's watching, Rob Ryan, if he had a little bit more talent on his defense, he was a fiery guy. I think he might have been able to get the job done.
Yeah.
Greg Williams, we already know, was a fiery guy. I don't know about him. I'm not a fan of him. Mike Zimmer is one of those guys, no nonsense guys that I like. Brian Flores is a name I'm seeing a lot. If we hire Brian Flores, Barry's already looking for that comp pick when he gets a head coaching job someplace else. When things resolve themselves legally with his lawsuit. What's that?
Will he get another head coaching job?
If he does a good job at defensive coordinator.
I don't know.
We already got a comp pick from Minnesota. They hired one of our
staffers,
one of our guys.
Yeah.
And we got a comp pick for that. Same with, Andrew Berry is going to play that game. And, I would not be surprised to see him take a chance or, something like that on a guy like Brian Flores, knowing that there could be a comp pick there.
I'm all for it. I don't care. Something's got to change. I mean, I don't care if it's him or Zimmer. Just get something in there. Somebody knows
Zimmer. I've heard some interesting stories about Zimmer. One of my favorites was actually told on a podcast. Andrew Hawkins on the Tomahawk Show was talking to Joe Thomas about Mike Zimmer. And he was the guy that would just, he would hold you accountable. He told a story about some guy that just got signed an extension with the Bengals. I think Zimmer was with the Bengals at that point in time, and Andrew Hawkins was there, and the guy wasn't doing very well. And, Mike Zimmer called him out on his contract, said, if you are going to rob a bank, at least wear a mask so it looks like you give a shit whether or not you get caught. That's the guy that I want, running the defense.
I mean, let's be honest.
Scary. Is that guy not scary? He always looks so angry.
I think if we're being honest with ourselves, I think the defense needs somebody who's fiery, in your face, and holds you accountable, because we're seeing way too many clips of guys dogging plays, taking plays off, not trying to tackle guys, letting guys run past them, just not playing their position the right way. I honestly think that that's what this team needs. I think they need a defensive coordinator that holds them accountable. And if they're not held accountable, or if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, then they get replaced with somebody else. I mean, that has to be what this team needs, because it doesn't make sense otherwise. Like, I can't imagine that an NFL defensive coordinator in Joe Woods is that bad that he, like Jared said, he's not teaching these guys to do it the wrong way. There's something wrong there. They either don't know how to do it, or they don't respect him enough to do it the right way. And I think that says everything that we need to know about this team. If that's the culture problem that we are going through, if they don't want to play for a coach just because they don't like a coach and money's not good enough to play, then what do you do with that? Like, it's just, where do you go from there?
Well, I think part of is the Watson deal. All the money he's getting, they know that there's no money left in the bank for them when their time comes up.
Wouldn't that make them more motivated to perform, to get money somewhere else, though?
You would think, but these are what, mid to late 20s guys. Right. Some of them early 20s. So I mean, when you were that young, were you really thinking about that far ahead? I know I wouldn't.
No, but I mean, you're talking about guys that are already multimillionaires. You know what I mean? Like, it's tough. I mean, if you're, I don't know. I just see it as they need something there. They need something to hold them accountable, because I think the accountability is just not there right now. And whether it's his coaching style
proves that.
Yeah, it has to.
The Delpit thing proves that. Like, it's easy to tell Winfrey that he's not making a trip or don't bother getting dressed. But you got a guy like Grant Delpit, and you're just not going to start him, but you're going to let him play. It's one play.
Right.
One. What does that do?
That does
what kind
nothing.
of accountability is that? That does nothing.
Nothing.
Worst case scenario is Denzel Ward, Greg Newsome. Mind you, Greg Newsome, Martin Emerson, JOK, these are young guys.
Right.
These are rookies or second-year players going, oh, like, hey, like, worst case scenario, I don't get the start on my stat sheet, but I'm still going to play. You know, it's ridiculous. It shows that there's a lack of accountability, but it's a mixture of a lack of accountability, and there's also ego there, right? John Johnson is when he says that players need to be held accountable, he's absolving himself from the situation by saying, hey, this is not me. I'm putting in effort. He's implying that he's putting in 100% effort and he's prepared, and that he's trying to lead by example, and these other guys aren't following suit. That is a mixture of ego and lack of accountability.
Hey, John, hit me up
go
in
to
the
John
DMs,
Johnson
buddy.
and say, like, hey,
I got some clips for you. You can explain to me what you're doing.
I don't know. And then you had Denzel Ward. This was a big topic earlier this season when nobody wanted to take the blame on defense for shortcomings. And then you have guys on the offense taking blame for stuff that happened on defense because they're team players and they understand accountability. And the mantra that's been in this building since Stefanski took over is smart, tough, and accountable.
Yep.
You're 0 for 3 on defense with those three things. You're not tough, you're not smart, and you're not accountable. The offense, completely different story. Completely different story, in my opinion.
I don't think the culture problem is on the offense.
Every Sunday, Rich. I like that. I like that.
Yeah, I don't think the culture problem is on offense at all. I think it's all on the defensive side of the building.
It's so frustrating. I'm getting a lot of shit on social media for standing up for Stefanski. I honestly do think Stefanski and Barry are the answer. This year is not going the way we wanted it to. It's certainly not perfect.
All right.
I'm advocating at this point for Woods to be let go, but people are quick to say, You can't blame Woods. You have to blame the players. It's the players. They're grown men. They should be able to motivate themselves. They should be able to prepare themselves and go out there and perform. And it's Stefanski's fault for not holding Woods accountable.
Well, yeah.
Which in some respect it is. In some respect it is. But
how do we know he's not?
Blow it up. Yeah, exactly. How do you know he's not?
I mean, the only thing he could do to show the fans that he's accountable is fire him, right? And it's not going to happen during the season. So
now, if it comes out, and I don't know that it would, but if it comes out that there's some sort of, disagreement behind the scenes where Andrew Berry's saying, Stefanski, I know that you've been with this guy for a decade and he's your buddy, but you got to fire him. And Deep Podesta's saying, Stefanski, you got to let this guy go. Like, he's the reason you're losing and this and that and the other. And Stefanski's like, I'm not doing it. There's a problem there. I don't know that that's the case. If we find out that that's the problem, then sure, Stefanski needs to be held accountable.
Well, he needs to go if that's the case.
Right.
But I don't think that that is the assumption that we should default to, not knowing exactly what is going on behind the scenes. And that's the tough part is when we talk sports, whether we're putting our analyst hat on or talking amongst ourselves as fans, whatever we do, it's pure speculation.
Yeah. I think
we only have the information that we have, right?
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit of everything, man. I mean, it's like you said. I mean, I think that we're dealing with some issues where certain positions are not near as talented as we would like them to be on defense. There are guys that are on the defensive side of the ball that when adversity hits them in the face, they tend to shut down. And, it's just not a good recipe. It's really not a good recipe for a team that's young, rebuilding, faces adversity frequently, has a rabid fan base. I mean, it's just not a good mixture. And, it's unfortunate because, you see it on social media every day that Browns fans deserve better. Yeah, that's true. We do. We've been loyal to this fan base for a really, really long time. And
but all of us, though?
Not all. No, not all of them. No,
most of us.
Anytime I say Browns fans, unless I say except for the crazy people, I'm you know what I'm saying? Like it's
except for the Browns bunch, brownie bunch or whatever they're called.
Yeah, I mean,
the Browns are
no matter what the
rebuilding,
issue, something has to be done to be changed. So,
I mean, the Browns are always rebuilding, though. They've been rebuilding since the 80s.
Right. And that's part of the culture problem is there's just too many Chiefs every year after year and every regime after regime. And everybody is trying to pull the team and organization in different directions and too many people meddling in it that shouldn't be. And, it's hard to overcome. The organization has just not been run right for quite some time, and it shows. It hasn't been the same since it came back from Baltimore. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I don't think we have a shot this weekend, boys.
I think we do. I think we do.
You think we do?
Yeah.
No.
It's 18 to 15.
Give me the roadmap. What is the path? What is the path here to a victory?
You think about Buffalo's got that short week playing on Thanksgiving Day against the Lions. They don't want to lay an egg when they're the only team playing on TV on Thanksgiving Day. The biggest, aside from the Super Bowl, the biggest football day of the year.
The Lions are worse than we are, though.
Exactly. So they don't want to lay an egg against Detroit. Because even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
I still feel like they could do this NBA style and play it like a back-to-back and rest their starters on day 2. I don't know.
Like I said, I'm not predicting a victory until I see multiple games strung together by a defense that looks competent. Whether it's scheme issues or talent or effort, it doesn't really matter to me. I think they're going to run all over us just like Miami did, and I think Josh Allen is going to tear us apart. My prediction technically, but if you had to ask me for one, I would say it's going to be, the spread's 9.5. It's probably going to be more than that. I'm going to say that they're probably going to beat us something to the tune of 21-28-6.
Yeah, like Ethan said there, I mean, they're calling for snow. So it's supposed to be fairly bad up there. What, a foot or so of snow? So both teams are relatively used to the elements.
Right. And normally it would be simple to say we have Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and our offensive line is doing well, and they have Devin Singletary and James Cook and maybe Naeem Hines, but we couldn't do it without the snow in the shade in 80-degree weather in Miami against Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert.
Yeah.
You know, like
what makes us think they're going to do it when
Yeah.
they're miserable and froze and ice cubes on the sideline? Like,
right. If the defense is giving up when the weather's nice and there's no adverse conditions, like how bad is it going to be? Like, this is the game where you find out based on the defensive effort if somebody came into the defensive side of the locker room and just lit their asses up.
I mean,
like
they're down
these guys.
Miami where go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was saying they're down in Miami where the weather is warm and nice, and they're thinking about going up to the club and that little girl in that little short mini skirt and trying to get the freak on.
Well, let's be honest. What we know about this team, they were probably partying the night before. Not to cut you off.
That too. That too. But I mean, you go to Buffalo. Really, do you know anybody that wants to hook up with Buffalo girl? Nothing against Buffalo ladies in Buffalo. But, I mean, really.
Hell no, they're just going to be in Canada the night before. What do you mean?
But I mean, really though, I mean, they're not going up there to get distracted by cheerleaders and girls in short skirts and go play on the beach and play beach volleyball or whatever. They're going up there to play some football in some cold ass weather.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell, but you know, see, I'm saying around 2 feet of snow from Friday to Sunday. It could get interesting. We do have Nick Chubb. Kareem Hunt's making me a little bit nervous. That old 1.5 yards per carry thing. He had 9 yards and his longest run was 7 yards. What does that tell you?
Yeah.
The offensive
a couple of those carries didn't go so well.
I'll look for him to have a good game this weekend.
All right. Well, hopefully if it's cold enough, Wills will keep his shirt tucked in because that is still driving me nuts. Me and Barry, when we sit down and watch football all Sunday, we're like, oh, look, it's a left tackle with his shirt tucked in. Weird. He gives a shit.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, Browns fans. I hope that they do pull it out, but I don't see it. Not right now.
Buffalo booty.
Buffalo booty.
Booty cheeks.
Booty cheeks, baby. Booty cheeks.
All right. Anything else you guys want to bring to the table before we close this thing out?
No, let's close it out because I feel like I've been negative for an hour and 13 minutes now. So
all right. Justin, thanks for joining the show. We appreciate you as always.
Problem,
have a good
problem.
evening. All right. We will close out the show now. This is Craig Fountain and Ryan Angelo with the Dawgs Table, a Dawgs By Nature podcast on the SB Nation of Vox Media Network. We will come to you next Tuesday at 9 live. Catch the replay for the first portion of the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts on the Dawgs By Nature Podcast Network. And we have the Overtime Show is what we're naming. That's our working title for the second part of the show. That is going to be available on replay on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. It posts after the show. You can watch the whole thing over again if you'd like. But yeah, it's going to be a rough one. Mentally prepare yourself for this weekend. If there was a game to mentally prepare yourself for, it's this one. It's not going to be pretty. If we come out with a win, we'll all be very happy, but manage your expectations going into this one.
Yep.
So we're all rooting for the Browns. Let's hope for the best. Until next time, go Browns.
Go Browns.